This is Laurie Bishop. She's a candidate for the new second Montana congressional seat. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I live in Livingston, and I guess I could say I'm a mom of three. And my first business in Livingston was a downtown business, and then I made my career in youth development and education. So I've been doing that over the last several years and work at the state level. I'm currently the outgoing director for the Montana After School Alliance. Spent a couple of years at OPI under Denise Juneau's administration, working with Graduation Matters Montana. And I am a sitting legislator. I'm in my third term, and that includes my second term on our leadership team in the House. Well, Montana has a history of electing women, obviously, to statewide seats on a regular basis. We haven't sent a woman back to D.C. since Jeanette Rankin. But I think that the trends that we see across the nation, and I think also our strong history of electing women, I certainly haven't thought about this race as though I'm at some disadvantage. I've thought about this race, about my strength as a candidate based on my experience and my knowledge of the state. And my just strength to be able to stand up to any other politician in this state. And so I don't really think about myself as a woman candidate. I think about myself as a candidate first.
Do you know there's talk that it's difficult to break through, that the old boys club exists strong in Montana. Do you think that that's the case, and do you think that's an obstacle to get through?
Yeah, I think having served in the legislature, I think that we think about leadership, and oftentimes that vision of leadership that comes first to mind is based on how men move through the world. And I would be lying if I didn't say that I see dynamics in the state legislature where there's a different way that men can interact with one another and be perceived, and when they're holding positions of power, that's a real dynamic. But I also think that women have their own leadership strength, and what I've watched over time is that women begin to understand their strengths and their leadership skills and their relevance at the table as well. And the more that they move into recognizing those strengths, the more success they have.
So when you get to Congress, are there certain national issues you're more interested in than others, or certain committees that you might want to be on?
Yeah, I certainly think about, just in terms of national issues, I think that I first think about the issues in Montana, but I do think that the issues that we're focusing on here are ones that are of relevance across the nation. So those top issues being child care and access to care and its relationship with our workforce, housing. We're having a unique moment in Montana, certainly in the last year and a half, but that we were feeling that in communities like mine and other communities across the state before the pandemic. And I think the data is showing us that communities across the nation are struggling with their housing costs and availability. And then the other part of that is mental health. And so we know that while we have some unique statistics in Montana, that's certainly an issue that's of relevance all across our nation. And we need to do more. So when I think about it, I think through that lens. I think that those are topics that are going to be of real relevance nationally as well as to our state. And then when I think about what it looks like in terms of serving, I certainly think I would lean on the strengths that I have both professionally and in my service in the legislature. So areas like education and social services are really strong for me. I also have served on the Judiciary Committee for 3 sessions here in our state legislature, and so issues of criminal justice and how our legal system works are also issues that I'm familiar with and I think are really relevant to to what's happening across the nation, and that I would be interested in working on as well.
And you were saying you were focused on Montana issues as well, and what are some of those things that you're...
I mean the biggest thing that I see is, I think people want to see their politicians working for them. And a big piece of that is making our economy work. And so I've really been thinking about what are the barriers to our economy being full steam right now. And many of those barriers are directly related to our workforce and their ability to be able to fully show up fully participate, to be able to afford to live in the communities where the jobs exist, be able to have good health care, be able to do all the things that they need to do. So if we think about meeting people's needs first, we're going to really be fueling our economy. So that's why I've really focused on childcare, housing, mental health as some of those top issues.
I've read in national outlets, that public health has been in decline since the Great Recession. There was less tax money available.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you've thought about that, but is there anything specifically that you'd like to do for public health, or have you?
Well, public health in general is a tricky question right now, right? As we're
Right.
navigating a pandemic and we're watching resistance and we're seeing just a lack of trust. So it's both a matter of resources and the accessibility of resources all across our state, regardless of the community that you live in. But it's also whether or not you have trust in those around you and the decisions that they're making and making things available. So if we're thinking about public health that way, obviously we have work to do on both the resource end and the trust end. If we're thinking about health in terms of access to not just healthcare, but the things that really we know contribute to community health. So, housing again becomes a really critical issue. Often not having stable housing is a huge piece of whether or not people are showing up and requiring healthcare. And we know it just is a strong relationship. Whether or not people have access to healthy food and can afford that food and have that support as well. Whether or not people live in communities where they feel connected to one another, those all have to do with public health. And I think are things that we could see better investment in, as well as just supporting communities as they implement strategies that really work for them. I think the biggest thing is, this is just a unique opportunity for our state to, go from 1 to 2 representatives. I see that as a really important moment for our state to have better representation, particularly in the House. But I also think about it, obviously, through a partisan lens. And I think if we reflect on politics in this last year in our state, one of the big things that's happened is that by losing Democrat representation, particularly in our statewide offices and at the national level, I think people are really feeling affected by whether or not the state is the purple state that they have come to really know and love. And so a big part of this race for me is really to help recover that sense of our own state and who we are and that balance that we really value. And I think that's a big piece of this particular seat and this race, is really fighting for our purple nature in our state and to just have more balance so that everyone feels that they have a voice and representation, and that they really appreciate it when they see more of that negotiation and work together. And I think that's something I certainly value, in having been able to work at the legislature. And I think bringing that forward and really being able to bring that to DC is something that I think a lot of people in our state want. I think the biggest thing is, this is just a unique opportunity for our state to, go from 1 to 2 representatives. I see that as a really important moment for our state to have better representation, particularly in the House. But I also think about it, obviously, through a partisan lens. And I think if we reflect on politics in this last year in our state, one of the big things that's happened is that by losing Democrat representation, particularly in our statewide offices and at the national level, I think people are really feeling affected by whether or not the state is the purple state that they have come to really know and love. And so a big part of this race for me is really to help recover that sense of our own state and who we are and that balance that we really value. And I think that's a big piece of this particular seat and this race, is really fighting for our purple nature in our state and to just have more balance so that everyone feels that they have a voice and representation, and that they really appreciate it when they see more of that negotiation and work together. And I think that's something I certainly value, in having been able to work at the legislature. And I think bringing that forward and really being able to bring that to DC is something that I think a lot of people in our state want.
Yeah, I've often thought, we need both conservatives and liberals, somebody say we need to get this done, and somebody to say, could we afford that, basically?
Yeah, I I would agree. I think, I mean, I had a colleague at the legislature say to me, you know, he had the honor of being able to serve both in the majority and in a legislative session that was balanced, and said, you know, if there's something that I think I would value more than even being in the majority, it would be being in that balance and having the opportunity to have to really work together. That it puts the pressure on everyone to have to really slow down and do work together. And I think we know that we get good outcomes when we do that at the local level, and I think people want to see their politicians do the same.
Well, can you think of anything else?
Kind of.
Yeah.
When you were talking about Montana issues a little while ago, I know from looking at, I did a little bit of research, but not as much as I should have, but looking at your website, one of the things that drives you is, or one of the things that you feel strongly about is how do I want to say this, is making sure that the people of Montana have a good living wage.
Mm. Yeah.
And it seems to me right now, that's kind of really important.
Sure.
It's kind of a huge issue right now. We have businesses that are not able to hire people because people
That's
are
right.
trying to find jobs
Right.
that pay more than $8 an hour.
Right.
Because you can't live on that. A student can't live on that.
Right.
So I guess I would like to know, like to hear you talk about that a little bit, what
Yeah.
your feelings are on that. And also maybe talk about, I know that there are places like Seattle who have gone to like a $15
Sure.
minimum wage,
Sure.
and what that means,
Sure.
what struggles they've met or
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big topic,
Yeah,
I
so
know, sorry.
I feel that's great. I can totally talk about that. I think that makes sense. So if we're thinking about a living wage and the impact about that, I think this is a really interesting moment, because I think that our conversation over the last several years has been trying to think about that through looking at our minimum wage, so in the nation and in the state in particular, and looking at whether or not that is a livable wage, and more often than not coming up short with that. But this is a moment where, based on the pandemic and our workforce shortage that we're seeing right now, even thinking about the $15 an hour, we've sort of blown past that, right? When you have entry-level positions in fast food and in certain retail settings starting well above $15 an hour, that's no longer a relevant moment. So we have to think about living wage through what is going to work for people on that side, but we also have to think about their overall expense, and that's where issues such as housing and childcare really come in. So even if we could get that minimum wage up and we could assure that people were making X per hour, whatever we thought made the most sense in a state like ours, the flip side of that is, if your housing costs have basically doubled in the last 5 years, that relationship is out of whack now as well. So we have to think about the whole of what makes livable states and communities, and then how does that work for the industries that need that workforce as well. I think we're seeing a renegotiation of all of those factors right now, and so I think we have to be thoughtful about that from a policy perspective. We really just need to be continuing to advocate for what do workers want, but I don't think we're in a moment where we can define that precisely, other than to just keep working on all of the different areas that really impact people's ability to live and work in the communities that they want to be in. And work for businesses, because if people cannot live and work in those communities, those businesses have no one to hire. So we can think about that from both sides right now.
Do you see this as a time where the model for, I don't even know if the model for is the right term, but sort of the model for like a small business, do you see this as a time where that may very well be changing?
Mm-hmm.
Because for a small business to exist,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
they almost need to hire people and pay them only $8 an hour. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, will that change?
Sure. I think we need to keep our eye on the ball in a way that protects our small businesses, because, I have been a small business owner, so I have have personally navigated issues of scale and margins and what you can afford to pay people based on the margins you get. And when you're a small business and you buy in smaller quantities, you tend to pay a higher price, right? So there are all of those aspects, and we need to make sure that we don't lose our small businesses as things get worked out. They're the lifeblood of our communities. I know we feel that in Montana. I would say that that's a national feeling as well. So we need to be attentive to that. We also need to think about whether the models for all small businesses are working. So as a great example, just again coming back to the needs of childcare providers are small business providers. We've put a lot of the onus on those childcare providers and the families that have to pay for that childcare almost single-handedly. And we know that that model isn't working. And it isn't because those small businesses don't know how to run an effective small business. It's because the way that we do this doesn't make sense. And we know that there are models that work better almost everywhere else, including in our own country with the military, right? So we provide that service to our military families, and it's a much more functional model that works for those who are providing the care. It works for the families that need the care, and it works for the industry that relies on that workforce having the care. So there's a case of we need to think about a new model that meets the needs of everyone, including those who are providing the service and those who need the service. So.
I have one more really off-the-wall question.
I love off the wall. Let's do off the wall.
Because you have a background in education.
Yeah.
Something that is, and this is kind of a personal question actually,
Sure.
I am such an advocate for media literacy and teaching media literacy. I mean, I believe it should be taught, this is my own personal opinion, from kindergarten on up.
Yeah.
And it should be as intense as math and reading. We live in a media-dominated society.
We do.
You can't enter a room and not be hit with hundreds of bits of media.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of wondering if you have any thoughts on that or any opinion on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I think I would agree with you. I think where I would probably put that is in that place of, I always think it's a good moment, and I think this coming through this pandemic is one of those moments when we're slowing down and we're really thinking about what do our kids need to be ready to enter fully into the world? What are the skills that they require and that are valuable in their life participating in society, as well as their ability to go into the world and be successful in whatever arena they want to have that success. And I think what we often see is it isn't those hard skills, it's often the soft skills. It is that ability to understand the information that's coming in, to be able to think about it, and to be able to see themselves and the relevance of it in their life. And it's also the ability to be able to negotiate new situations with new people in that way. So we think a lot about those socio-emotional skills. So I would put it in the category of, this is a good moment for us to be evaluating all together what do kids need in order to be successful in the world. And I would agree with you that media literacy and the ability to understand the information that is being bombarded upon them is really important. And I think about that not just through their lens to be able to be good critical thinkers, but also we know that as they're in new media worlds, and particularly in social media worlds, it's impacting their sense of self and their sense of self-worth, and that's a really critical piece as well. So I think we can think about that really broadly, and I put that right in that category of it is always a good moment when we're really putting the needs of our students at the center and thinking about how we can do a better job to prepare them to be in the world.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great question. Thanks for that.
The Democratic Party has kind of fallen into, well, they always have, but that there are some folks that really want a lot of government aid to people, and others that are more conservative and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And where do you see yourself in that
Yeah.
inside the party?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think when I think about it, I don't think about it as that we need more, although I do think we need more. I think there's a lot of economics 101 around investment. I think we're seeing that right now with this ARPA funding in particular, that what we're seeing is communities are really hungry for that investment because that it just hasn't been there at the level that they need it. And it shouldn't just be there when we're in crisis. And it just as we think about small government and local government needing to continue to make the appropriate investments in their infrastructure, in their community over time, we need to be keeping our eye on that ball in as a country. But I don't always think it's about more resources. From rural America's perspective, it's about resources that better match our needs. It doesn't have to be more. It should just be designed to reflect what we do and who we are here. And I think about as well. So I put myself in the category of I want to see government work, and I want to see it work in particular for rural states like ours. And that is what I'm most passionate about. So that doesn't always equal more investment, it equals smarter investment. You know, we're coming off of running around this state and certainly plan on doing much more of that. And having conversations with people in various communities of various sizes where they either feel like they, in many cases, you know, talking to people who are looking around their community and feeling a little bit isolated in terms of their political views. And what they're really hungry for is just being able to be in conversation with people who maybe share a different political perspective about how they work together to just make their community work. And so we're spending a lot of time right now thinking about how, beyond just thinking about the big issues and the things that tend to catch the news bites and are those topics that are sort of the hot button topics, how we really engage with communities around just those things that are important to them that they can begin to work together on, and that help them build back more of that community fabric where they feel like they're connected to one another and can solve problems together. So that's something that we've just are seeing people are hungry for in our state, and that we definitely, as we're thinking about, you know, as I think about what do we need to be doing in DC, I want to think about first, like, what do you need to do in your community, and how can we all be speaking that same language that's about how we come together as communities to get things done. So that's just something it's been really interesting to see come up in the conversations that we're having, and we're eager to get out to communities of all sizes and just hear more about what is working in their community that they can build on and that we can build on at the federal level.
So just the act of campaigning is sort of edifying. You know?
Yeah, I think that people want to be seen. We're certainly seeing that that there are a lot of people that feel unseen in their community, and we want to make sure they feel seen, and that the strengths and they want to get to work, and they're sometimes struggling to figure out what is it that we can work together on when we feel so divided. But what they really want to do is get to work.